The following is a Spirit Street production.
You know, one of the fun parts about doing this job is there is actually a day named after me. It is Ask Big B Day. I appreciate everybody joining us on the Big 12 Insiders and sending your questions. Thank you, guys. We're going to get to it. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right. Welcome, everybody, back to the Big 12 Insiders. This is your guy, Big B, Brien Hanley, along with Tim Fitzgerald. Fitz is under the weather, so he is going to truck through this as best he can. Fitz, hang in there, my man. Hang in there.
Just a persistent cough, but, man, it kind of sucks. Not much sleep either last night. My poor wife. My wife could sleep through a hurricane, so maybe she did okay.
Gotcha. Well, again, today is Ask Big B Day on Big 12 Insiders. We got a lot of really good questions. We're going to break some of those down. First things first, let's just talk about this. You know, we broke it down as far as last week, or not last week, but earlier, talking about some of the Big 12 plans as far as the naming rights.
Right.
So I guess the question is, and I know we talked about that, but again, people ask, is it a good idea for naming rights? And if they're selling off the naming rights, are schools going to then do the same thing, Fitz, and maybe do naming rights on uniforms, on the football stadium, on the football field, all these types of, on the basketball arena, on the jerseys? Are the schools then going to incorporate and start doing some of that themselves?
You know, it's been done on basketball courts for years.
Yeah.
Maybe it's done on football fields. I'm not sure. The NCAA, I bet, approves jersey logos here pretty soon.
Right.
It's just the way we're rolling. It's going to look like NASCAR. A kid will come to an interview in his Whataburger hat with his jacket on from, I don't know. I mean, O'Reilly Auto Parts. It's crazy what we're going through. Well, if we're going to have Big 12 sponsored by Allstate or the Allstate 12, how long before we have the Colorado Athletics sponsored by? You know, it's crazy where we're headed in this, but it's all about that crush for money. And it's not greed, folks. It is an attempt to keep up with the financial demands of college athletics,
right?
As stated by the courts, that you need to do this, this, and this, and all of a sudden, you know, you're going to lose $20 million a year to profit sharing with student athletes. I gotta believe that's going to be appealed. I know the NCAA has bowed down quite a bit, but if of course it's a settlement, you know, I mean, that's what they're settling on. I guess you can't appeal a settlement, but I just don't think it's going to go well for everyone. We're going to end up with just nonsense.
Yeah. And maybe it's a 20 million initially, and maybe that number every year gets down to 8, 7, something like that. But if it's 20 million every single year, that's going to be an absolute problem.
Yep, it is. And that's why we're seeing all this. It literally is. But, you know, someone pointed out after our previous show about the naming rights, they want to keep the logo, not necessarily the 12. And I'm like, well, it's 12. I mean,
is the logo
is the number 12.
Yeah.
So that's kind of different types of apples. It's not apples and oranges. It's just two different types of apples. It's going to have 12 in it. When you say it out loud, it'll be 12. Whether it's Allstate or, you know, Buc-ee's, it doesn't matter. It's going to be 12, which is odd to me, but maybe that's what they feel like the branding is about. I would argue it's not. I mean, it was about 8, and then it became about 12, and it's not even accurate. I wouldn't mind just abandoning all that and resetting with a whole new concept. Because as much as we know the Big 12 has a brand, is it a good brand? Is it a brand perceived to be lesser than the other two brands?
Right.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Well, my thinking is, you know, the foresight back when the conference was initially established. You know, yes, there were 12 teams, and it was coming. I mean, the majority of them were Big 8 teams, and they were adding 4 teams. But at that time, maybe somebody should have sat down in a room and said, you know what? Yeah, I get it. We were the Big 8 and now we're the Big 12, but maybe we just need to come up with a totally different name
Yeah.
altogether. And that didn't happen. It seemed like just ease of doing business or maybe even laziness. We'll just call it the Big 12 since there's 12 teams now. I think that's probably somebody just threw that out. Yep, that's easy. That works versus just taking the time to actually come up with a conference name. I think the conference can still do that, Fitz.
Yeah.
I think they can just come up with a conference name. It doesn't have to be the Big 12. And people are going to know. They're going to know. And by the way, if the conference affiliation, if it's all about the name, then the Big 12 hasn't been around long enough for that. To be
Yeah.
honest, it hasn't been around like the SEC or the ACC or the Big 10. Hadn't been around long enough for that. So if that's what they're really worried about, we can change it and people will get used to it. It'll take some getting used to. Give it a half a year. Give it 6 months and people will be just fine.
Going back to the mid 90s when the Big 12 was created out of it was a merger. Look, they could say it was a new conference all you want. That's just to appease Texas. Now that they're gone, let's admit it. 4 schools joined the Big 8. I mean, they might have frozen the records and all that stuff, but no, it's the Big 8, now the Big 12. And it's my understanding at that time they also trademarked Big 16, Big 14, I think, and even maybe Big 20. I know Big 16 was almost certainly trademarked. I got to be honest. While the Roman numerals don't look as cool, to me, that's a stronger sounding conference. The Mayhem 16 or, All State 16, it just sounds like a new conference. It is. This is more of a new conference because half of this 16 team alignment wasn't here just a year ago.
Right.
I mean, we go back a year ago, it was BYU and company that were weeks away from joining on July 1. And now we've got 4 new schools. This really is a new conference. When 50% of your members now have come from the outside within a 2-year period, it's a different conference.
Yeah. It's a different conference. And that's okay. I think people think that, it's a different conference and that's a bad thing. No, it's not. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It just means it's different, and I think that's okay. Let me go to another question here as far as what do you think the Big 12 plans for realignment are? I think it's wide open.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I don't think the Big 12 has any illusions that things aren't going to change between right this very second and the next 18 months. So I think the Big 12 is open for business if it needs to be open for business. And quite frankly, Fitz, I think it has to be open for business.
Yeah, I totally agree. Everyone wants answers on this, and all they're going to get is speculation at this point because they buttoned this up pretty good. Although our friend Josh Pate with 24/7 had that great tweet of the glass of water shaking in reference to the ACC, and it wasn't good news. He made it clear. We haven't heard what that is, but something's cooking.
Right.
And it might entirely be Brett Yormark making a definitive move to try to get some of those schools in. I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be in the ACC right now. I certainly wouldn't want to be Wake Forest.
No.
I mean, they carry no value. Boston College, unfortunately, is the same way, which is stupid. That university should have great athletic programs and have a name like they did when Doug Flutie was running around. But they've just let that rot on the vine, and now they're going to be relegated to, lesser than status.
Correct.
More so than what Oregon State and Washington State deserved. They deserved to be in a power conference. They just got left out. I'm going to make the argument that schools like Wake and Boston College and maybe even Syracuse, because that brand has aged horribly, probably don't belong at this point. Because fresher, younger brands like UCF have risen up and kind of stolen that spot from those schools.
Yeah. It's tough. It is tough, but you are exactly right. UCF has leapfrogged. Think 10 years ago, there's no way you thought that UCF would have a bigger name or bigger brand than a Syracuse.
Yep.
But it absolutely holds more weight right now. And I don't be quite honest with you, Fitz. I'm not sure it's close. I'm not sure it's close. So Syracuse has just fallen off that much. I don't know. Everything is just crazy.
I would make an argument, Big B, that if the conferences is just expanding, trying to reach a number, I think USF carries more weight than Boston College.
Yeah, absolutely, it does.
It's in that Florida market. It's another school that has a massive alumni base that can be engaged. You know, from the point of view of simply recruiting. If you're the Big 12, I think that's really the Big 12's play here, to focus on Florida. And if you can get Miami and for somehow Florida State, again, I don't think that's going to happen, but I know Brett Yormark's trying. I wouldn't mind adding USF. I know UCF people want them shoved aside in that big brother, little brother debate that is always entertaining between rivals. But, you know, picking up the Tampa market, and I don't mean that from television, I mean that from perception, recruiting.
Correct.
That now the Big 12 flag is planted in that market. I think it would be critical. And the more recruiting the Big 12 can do in Florida and make those kids feel like that's their conference as much as anyone else, is huge for the league. And I see K-State in there quite a bit. Iowa State's been in there. Florida's just, you know, a massive recruiting gold mine. And so I think the more they can do in Florida and in the Southeast brings tremendous value to the Big 12.
Well, the thing about Florida is there's so many kids every single year that are high Division I prospects,
right?
You know, that can come out of there, whether it's football or basketball. I know that we're mainly talking about football, but football and basketball, they have so many kids every single season. And it's not as big as Texas, obviously, or as big as California. But if you just do per capita, it's Florida that has the most players that come out. And for years, it was just feeding grounds for everybody and Big 12 schools alike. It can still be that if you show them, hey, come to our school, come here, be a part of what we're doing. Kids will leave because everybody can't go to Florida State. Everybody can't go to Florida. Everybody can't. It used to be Miami. You know, you couldn't go in there. That was the thing. You try to go into Florida, you just couldn't get in there. But you almost got the leftovers.
Yeah.
Well, the leftovers were pretty damn good, Fitz. That was the thing. They were pretty good. You know,
that's the point.
Loads of talent.
That's the point. Is, you know, the fascinating thing about recruiting, and maybe it's less so than it used to be. When we were in high school, some dudes are just more physically developed at age 16 and 17.
Correct.
But not at 19. It's all changed. Again, I mean, they focus on these young kids starting at 14 and 15, projecting them as great athletes and great players. And quite often the highest rated recruits are just more physically developed. They're ahead of the curve, but they're also great players. And I'm not saying that they don't remain great players, but there's a lot of guys that might be 3-star entrants or even 2-star entrants, you know, at their senior year of high school that just blossom later and turn into incredible players. So I think if the conference wants to be competitive with its peer institutions, getting into Florida and staying in Texas and finding those gems, finding those guys that are going to develop them, and then try to protect them with your NIL package instead of using it in the recruiting processes so much. I think that's a formula that could work for the Big 12.
Yeah, absolutely. So break here on the other side of this. We'll get into some of this NIL stuff. There's a couple of questions that came up about contracts. We'll talk about that and more. One word from our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners, and we will be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Brien Hanley here with Tim Fitzgerald. So, a couple more questions that we got on Ask Big B Day today, Fitz. First one is about NIL contracts.
Yeah.
And, our year-to-year contracts with these NIL, is that going to become the norm? Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't plan on being a lawyer. I don't even want to be a lawyer. Digging into some of this stuff, it almost feels like you have to be a lawyer. But having said that, I think the year-to-year thing, I think it has to make sense, Fitz. I think you've got to be able to do that. I know the courts are starting to get in the way of all of that and kind of dictating, but I think these things have to be year to year. There has to be some sort of accountability. You can't just pay somebody, hey, come to our school, you show up, you don't come, you get all this extra money. I just think at some point a contract has to be able to be signed.
Yeah, and in some cases it is. In some cases, then they don't fulfill that contract,
Right.
or the student athletes don't feel like they fulfilled it. But there's language in the contract that gives them outs.
Right.
We've talked about this. The NCAA needs to construct some type of protective net for the student athletes, whether it's verifying agents or whatever it would be, that they know they're not only getting advice on what they're worth, but also what the contract means. I mean, does it mean yearly? Do I get this all in cash? Is it goods? What contracts are confusing. And sometimes I think they're confusing on purpose so that you don't know really what you're signing. And these kids we're running into that a lot. But yeah, I think there needs to be a safety net for these players because they will continue to get taken advantage of, even if they're getting money. They may not understand the full scope of their actual deal.
Right. Now, here was one question that I had. It seems basic. It seems simple, but it's still, I think it's net worthy or definitely worthy of us bringing up. What are the tax implications with all this NIL stuff? I mean, how much taxes are they being paid? What are the I mean, again, we're not tax lawyers or anything like that or tax accountants, but has anybody even put any thought into that as far as kids paying taxes? And if they do have to, which I'm guessing they do, what are they doing? How are they doing it? I mean, as a 19-year-old kid or 20-year-old kid, I'm guessing you don't have very many write-offs. What's happening with that money? I got a feeling that's going to end bad for somebody, Fitz. You're going to get 5 years down the road and somebody's going to owe $150,000 in taxes, and it's going to be a bad deal.
Yeah, they're going to rip through their money and have a lot of fun. And then, oh yeah, the tax man's now knocking. You haven't paid taxes. It's a big concern. One of the things I would encourage athletes to do, particularly, there's rumors that Coleman Hawkins, which is bringing up a lot of these questions, just got $2 million from Kansas State's one of their NILs. NIL I'm not even familiar with, to be honest. Nobody was until this. That why not ask for half of the cash value put into a retirement account at age 22 or whatever he is, you chunk even like 500,000 in that account. Young man, you're going to retire an extremely wealthy person unless something, the total collapse of our financial systems happened. But
correct.
Yeah, if someone had given me $100,000 at age 22 and said, "Oh, you can't spend it. I'm putting it in a retirement account you can't touch until you're in your 60s," I would have been pissed off, but I'd be really happy right now.
Correct.
I mean, because we don't have those kind of resources. So hopefully some of these kids are being really smart about the money. But again, are they getting the advice to do these things?
Probably some are. I would say most are not.
Yeah.
Most are trying to take care of as many people as they can take care of. I think that's probably part of it. Another part of it is handout. And people got their hands out, just, hey, man, I heard you got this, heard you got that, which kind of leads me into, one of our final questions here is why are NIL deals, why are they made public? Now,
they're not.
And that's the thing. They're not made public. So how does everybody know how much somebody got? It's all speculation. It's like, how does that number get out? I've said before, look, people don't like agents. Okay. When you've got these, you are trying to tell me that these agents of these agents are not leaking this information out. Why?
Exactly.
Hey, I got this guy this amount of money. Of course they're leaking it out.
They're trying to get other customers.
They're not public knowledge, but somehow they get out in public.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way that coaching moves get made public.
Correct.
The agents leak stuff
Yes.
for their own advantage. Look what I got my client. You should probably be my client too. There's no verification of that $2 million number for Coleman Hawkins,
Right.
Whether it's cash or value or, like an IRA or something. There's nothing there that tells us that that's true. And I haven't been able to get anyone in on this because, again, by the court rulings and the NCAA rules, currently NIL collectives cannot be connected to the university
Right.
As employees. They have to be separate. You can now have an official one, but those contracts aren't privy to any kind of open records because they're between a citizen and a private entity. Just in the same way, contracts to BYU or Baylor aren't open records because those are private institutions, not state-sponsored schools. So that is just the agents getting on the horn with the biggest, baddest sports journalists that they know and leaking that number out, even if it's not true. Everyone runs with it. Maybe Coleman Hawkins is getting less than that, but his agents told someone it was $2 million.
Right.
And that's solely to try to attract new clients that think he'll get me $2 million too, which probably won't happen. But I'll give Coleman Hawkins credit. He waited out the market. He waited for this market to catch back up, and the demand now far exceeds the supply of players, and he reaped the benefit of that.
Absolutely. And don't fault him at all. Look, I always say the same thing. We might think that it's crazy for somebody to pay somebody this amount of money, but my thinking is you're worth what somebody's willing to pay you.
You got
It's
it.
just like your house. You sell your house, you might think your house is Taj Mahal, but if somebody's only willing to pay you $50 for it, your house is worth $50. So
Yep.
we're going to take one final break. We do have one other question after we take our last break here, but we're going to take one final break from our partners at Synergy Financial Partners, and we will be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. One last question on Ask Big B Day. Somebody said or asked about any news about any realignment stuff with the SEC and the ACC. I haven't heard anything as far as the SEC. I have talked to a couple people that are kind of connected with University of Louisville, just where I'm from, and they think things are cooking in the ACC. They people in Louisville firmly believe that by the end of this summer, that I don't know if the ACC is necessarily going to implode, but there is going to be movement with the ACC, and the University of Louisville at least has been aligning themselves to make a move. Where? I would say the Big 12 is a big time landing spot for Louisville.
Look, I don't see Louisville getting a Big 10 or SEC invite.
No.
So they're wise to work the Big 12 angle hard.
That's right.
Hey, look where we're located. Isn't that perfect? Yeah, again, we don't know where these conferences are moving.
Right.
Keep this in mind, and this has been pointed out before, that the Big 10 was kind of, I don't want to say coerced, but convinced to take Oregon and Washington. Those are two big fan bases, good TV ratings.
Right.
And they felt like it devalued them to a degree. I would argue that no, it brought you a great deal of value because it made your league more competitive. Because they'll line up with Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and compete. So do they want to go beyond that though? I mean, do they want, maybe there's some certain schools. I think North Carolina is the one that can pick wherever they want to go, just because of fan base and location, the combination of. But beyond that, does the SEC really want to bring on Florida State?
I don't
Do
think
they?
so.
I mean, they got Florida, and
Yeah.
does Florida want? Again, UCF doesn't want USF. Do you think Florida wants Florida State
Nope.
in their conference? So all of that's in play. Does South Carolina really want Clemson around?
Right. Nope.
Look, that's another relationship where they view them as little brother when little brother's been kicking their ass.
Right.
And so much stuff. So there's a lot of layers here. You know, it's just not we get to pick up these sticks and add them to our pile. They have to match. They have to fit. And I think the only one that knows that a lot of these schools bring benefit and fit is the Big 12. And if they could somehow coerce, convince, promise, whatever, to get some of these powerful ACC schools into the Big 12, Big B, that's a game changer. That goes back to yesterday's topic. They may not ever be able to replace Oklahoma and Texas in overall value with two teams, but if you bring in the best of the ACC, Brett Yormark pulls that off and convinces them, look, you don't want to be little brother in these conferences. Come be a big partner. Sit at the same table here in the Big 12. If he pulls that off, it really does change the landscape of college athletics.
Absolutely. And again, I know a lot of people worry about maybe the travel because you've got Utah and BYU and they'd be going all the way to Clemson. Well, you'd also have the travel partners that would come into play big time when you're talking about that. And look, I get it. You got the women's soccer team and the men's soccer team that would be traveling that far, but it's going to be what it is at this point. I think the one thing that people have to realize, Fitz, we can't control it as fans, regardless of what we do or say. We're not going to be in control of this thing. So since we're not in control, you got to get used to the change. And I think if you just get used to the change and you get comfortable with it being uncomfortable, I think that's the best thing for everybody. Just I know that's a cliche, and we've been full of them the last couple of days. I love that. But I just think you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that's what college athletics is at this point, and it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
You know, people argue so correctly that 24 is just too big. But I think the flip side of that is, I mean, as I've said, you're actually 2 conferences of 12 or 3 conferences of 8. But if you stop and look at it that way, there might be real benefits. If you've got 8 schools within your region,
absolutely,
that alleviates a lot of this travel and scheduling problems.
Absolutely.
I think 24 is too many, but even at 20, there's, 18 actually works pretty well. If you can, coordinate off to be 6, 6, and 6, there's 5 football games every year you're going to play in your region. And then maybe 2 teams from the other regions. I think it really limits your travel, keeps you regional in a sense. But if you're Colorado, if you're only playing 2 teams from the Eastern pod or grouping, if you want to say,
not that big a deal.
Yeah, you're only going over there once and someone's coming to you. And then you're going to Midwest once and someone's coming to you. That just changes how people might stop and think about, how these conferences are being built. I think the Big 12 could lead the way in that. And certainly getting to 18 would be very simple for them. But getting to 18 and divided up the right ways is not as simple because you're probably going to end up out of balance and end up breaking up some rivalries. Like right now, if you had needed 6 teams out west, you'd probably move Texas Tech to that western region, which means cut ties with some of those Texas schools, and I don't think they'd want that.
Right. Yeah. But again, like we mentioned, you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it's just kind of the way it is right now. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to join us today on Big 12 Insiders. I appreciate everybody. Again, we love the support. Remember to continue to comment, like, follow, subscribe, hit the notification bell to let you know when the videos are coming out. We're Tuesday through Thursday now, during the summer months. So we appreciate everybody being there. We will catch you next week on the Big 12 Insiders.
This has been a GoPowerCat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.